All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining us for our annual planning workshop series. So today is our second of 3 workshops. And today we're going to be talking about going from your annual plan to actual performance within marketing and the role of campaign planning with that. If you missed our first workshop, the recording and the slides are available now, and I will include them in a link in the follow-up to today's session. Annual planning is great, but without a solid campaign strategy and planning process to translate it into focus for your marketing team, it can still result in random acts of marketing. And with a solid campaign strategy, it also allows you to do both top-down and bottoms-up approach to marketing, assigning budget to campaigns versus channels, and allowing you to demonstrate concrete value to the business. And since planning and budgeting, as well as proving impact, are inextricably linked, that's why we're partnered with our friends at UpTempo on this series. So a few quick things before we get into it. One, we will leave time at the end of today's session for Q&A. So please add your questions during the presentation to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Secondly, we will absolutely be sending out the recording as well as the slides following today's session. So please check your inboxes tomorrow morning first thing and feel free to share with your teams. And then lastly, after the Q&A session, UpTempo will host a short backstage pass. They'll share a quick overview of what an enterprise marketing platform looks like and the benefits of having one place for all your planning and budgeting needs. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. So first and foremost, we have Kathy Mackey, EVP of Innovation and co-founder of Inverta. Also from Inverta, we have Shelly Kleza, our VP of Account Management. And last but not least, they are joined today by Jim Williams, CMO at UpTempo. Well, that's about enough for me until we get to the Q&A. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to kick us off.
Jessica, thank you very much. Just go on. As a recap for anyone that came the last session or a quick overview for anyone that's new, this is our annual plan on a page, and this is our recommended output for actually putting together your 125-page whatever deck of your annual plan. And the reason we recommend this is I've seen too many of them, these masterpieces, I'll call them, that take you months to create and your team about 10 minutes to forget once they have it complete. It just goes on G Drive, it's a virtual shelf, and it's never referenced again. And that is a terrible fate for something so important. And so what we recommend this plan on the page for, it takes all your brilliant thinking and distills it down to one page for 3 main reasons. And the first one, it's the ultimate alignment tool. It actually is a great way to communicate what your plan is and for your team to consume it. And to answer that question that always bubbles up from your team is, why are we doing this? The second is it's a great tool for defending your strategy. When people come in, it's always an ongoing stream of, I have a brilliant idea what we can do. And you can politely say, fascinating, but here's what we agreed to do. And the last one, it basically gives your team focus. It's everyone rowing the same direction, and it's your team's North Star. Now, this is still a big annual plan. This is the big picture thinking. And on your annual plan, not everything is always tied to revenue. You could have things like you're establishing a category or you're building out your ecosystem for your partners. But I guarantee there's always at least something around revenue. On this one, it's growing sales to 125 million. And this is where they're saying, you have an approach and a strategy. Well, I think part of how I might do that is I'm going to basically get customer acquisition. I think I can do it, 10 million. And then you have basically ways you're going to do it. You might say, hey, with the mid-market team, I'm going to focus on a couple industries. For my enterprise team, I may leverage an ABM one-to-few. Or I might do something around, hey, we have a new FinServe product coming out, and I want to actually focus on that market. You'll have some goals, and then you'll have some high-level ideas of how you're thinking to do this. You may have a campaign for your IT security group, or you're going to get a self-guided demo. But this is all high level. You've got to go to the next level down. And this is where your head of campaigns comes in. This is where they start to take that and turn it into a high level strategy. They go the next level down in detail. They'll have more specific goals. They have actual personas. They have clear objectives. And again, they have more ideas around what they think those programs are needed for you to achieve your goals. And again, but your team are not mind readers. This is like the roadmap for your team to start to see, how do I take those big goals that you laid out and how does this turn into reality? And that said, because your team are not mind readers, this starts to give them, it really gets to the question of, well, I think I know what they meant, but I'm really not sure. So this just starts to add more clarity. And the next down is this is where you get to the nitty gritty. This is your quarterly plan. Think of it like a road trip. Your annual plan is, we're going to take a road trip in California. Your annual campaign strategies, well, we're not going anywhere in California. We're going to go from Mendocino to San Francisco. Your quarterly plan is going to be, hey, here are the highways we're taking. Here's where we're stopping for gas. Here's actually the places we're going to visit. And who's actually in charge of getting us snacks along the way. That is where the detail comes in. On your quarterly plan, you're really saying, this is the content I'm using. These are the actual people I'm targeting. This is the tactics I'm going to be using. This is what actually brings it to life. And again, this gets down to the other thing you'll start to do when you put this together is you start to connect your top down. These are all the big lofty goals I had. Do you actually have the people, budget, and resources to actually deliver on that? And this is where the rubber meets the road, is on this quarterly plan. On the last one, we really outlined what was the timeline for doing this. So we had the annual plan on here. Anything in yellow is where you start to plan your campaigns. So think of while someone's doing the annual plan, you can be doing all your prep, your research, your insights, what worked, what didn't work, gathering that together. When the annual plan is done, you work on your annual campaign plan, you socialize it, and then you get into that nitty gritty. This is the stuff that's going to bring all that big picture ideas to life, is your quarterly campaigns and activation. So with that, that's the overview. I want to turn it over to Shelley because she's actually going to take you through an example of how this works. So Shelley, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to stick with your travel analogy and say that my husband and I were RVers. And I really like to think about annual campaign strategies, sort of comparing it to that. Like, we wouldn't head out in our RV to go on this cross-country trip without a GPS, because trust me, that would be scary. Nobody would want to be in the stressful conversations that we have, or the cost that might come up because we've gone and made a wrong turn. It's the same thing for your marketing team. So they need to look at this like basically not just another marketing activity. They need to look at it as this is business critical. It's an initiative that's going to give their team focus and direction. So they've got their GPS for the year and they actually know what to do against it. So when you think about campaigns, I would also say you want to remember that a campaign it runs long term. Often it can run a year, it can run longer than that for some people. But it does need to have, as you can see at the top of our template, a specific theme. It needs to have specific goals, and it needs to be targeted to specific personas and use cases. And so those need to be defined for each campaign that you plan on running over the course of the year. But in addition to that, it's going to have different types of programs for awareness or demand or engagement, as you see in this example. It could be other things, but this is just an example. And each of those would have its own objective and its target audience, as you see here. So in the top right of the template, you're going to see that that's where you would get your annual budget, and you'd basically break that budget down for this campaign across these types of programs. So this is really your big roadmap for the year as it relates to this specific campaign that is attached to this specific theme. So this approach really does keep away the random acts of marketing, and it allows the team understanding of how they're going to drive towards those business results. I like to say that it's really the difference between hoping for success or actually planning for it. So let me do a little bit of a double click into themes. This is really an important concept that I think a lot of people get confused, because it really does help campaign consistency throughout the year. So it's an anchor for that. And I think there are 4 critical elements you want to think about when you are considering the development of your themes. The first one is it really needs to be buyer pain point specific. You want to ensure that it addresses real challenges that your customers are having, and that it anchors in reality that would resonate with them. The second one, you want to make it simple. You shouldn't have to explain it to anybody. They need to automatically, your audience needs to understand it and how it relates to them. The third thing would be that it needs to be relevant throughout your entire buyer journey, all the way from awareness to decision. And it tell that consistent story across the entire journey. And then lastly, it needs to really stand the test of time. So it needs to be strong enough that it can endure and carry that campaign forward and maintain its impact month after month if you're doing this, over the course of a year. So those 4 elements come together to make a really strong theme that creates that glue to unite all of your content and messages. And then if you think about how does that theme ladder up all of the critical components that I think it informs. So having a consistent storytelling theme is important. It's where your company's vision's based. It's how you want to position over time. But it does play into these other areas. So I'm just going to take us through an example, because I do think it'll help sort of bring this to life a little bit. So if my theme, let's just take the first one, is do more with less, then if you think about that from a positioning standpoint, that positioning statement is communicating your unique place in the market. Like, how do you want to be perceived? So it might materialize in a way like this first bullet, which is we maximize value by optimizing resources, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the differentiating statement, and it's clear and it needs to be compelling. And then next is your messaging. So you really want that to articulate specific benefits and value of your offering. So first bullet is reduce processing time by 30% while improving quality scores. That's a key point and value prop that make that offering real. And then lastly, your copywriting. So these are really the actual words that bring all the theme and positioning and messages to life. So they're those headlines in your email copy, their website copy, their sales collateral, etc. You get the point. It's really carrying that theme across every channel that you have. And I wouldn't say that this is a linear process. It's really a framework that ensures consistency and impact across the entire customer journey through all the touch points that they're going to have. So let's move on into how does that roll into actual campaign planning, and how do themes play a critical role in making that strategy come to life? So I'm going to walk you through how that might look quarter to quarter. So we think about quarterly planning in 4 distinct phases, and you see those here. Each one has its set of inputs and actions and outputs and people that are involved. I'm not going to go into the details, but I wanted you to see the matrix of that. What I will do is walk through the phases. The first phase is campaign planning. So that's where you are going to translate your annual themes and goals into actual quarterly initiatives. And that's going to flow into your pre-launch, which is where your teams get all the detail of the plan ready. Like they're writing copy for their landing page, they're prepping the webinar and working with the SME there. They're potentially even creating new assets here for areas they might have gaps. So The next phase is launch. So that's blast off. It's where the campaign goes live. And there are lots of things that make that happen across the course of your timeline. But finally, and I think most importantly in a lot of ways, is measure and optimize. And it's where a lot of people fall down because they get it off the ground, they launch, and then they're on to the next thing. And I would caution you not to skip this step. This is where you should track your performance and make those data-driven adjustments that you need as you move quarter to quarter. So think about your quarterly planning like a rolling cycle. Each quarter, you're actually going to build on the lessons you learned from the last one, but you're going to stay aligned the entire time to that overall annual campaign strategy. And I think another thing that's really important to remember is that this is not a one-person activity. This is a cross-functional team activity where everyone is collaborating at every phase, not just the planning phase, not just the launch phase when everything has to get created, but throughout the course of all 4 phases. And that's everyone from your demand team to your content team to your operations team, build team. Don't forget events. Events should be part of this quarterly planning because it should be integrated into an overall campaign. All of those should be aligned and moving in lockstep to bring these campaigns that are cohesive to life. And this approach, I think, really helps maintain consistency, but it also gives you that ability to be agile and to optimize as you need because things happen. You know, market changes happen that you have to react to. Your executive team decides that they're going to pivot mid-year and you need to be able to respond to that. So this framework actually gives you the ability to do that. You're probably asking, what does that sort of look like as a plan? What are the details of it? So on the next slide, I'm going to walk you through what I think a great template of a campaign could look like, a quarterly campaign. You'll see at the top there is a theme. So again, I walk back to theme. This is why I double clicked into them because that's where you start. Like what theme am I actually going to amplify? And just logistics. When do I want to launch this? How long is this campaign going to last? And what business goal am I actually supporting along for this campaign? And then if you click into the next, you're going to see that there is a summary section. And in that summary section, this is sort of those high level details, but it's used as alignment and it helps people understand what they're going to be doing as it relates to this campaign. So you're going to want to talk through the objective of the campaign. What type of campaign is it? So am I trying to drive awareness? Am I trying to drive acquisition, demand? Am I trying to engage certain users? Is this a customer type campaign? So that's really what that type is intended to be. And are there any specific products this particular campaign is supporting? Those would be identified here. And then you walk through the channels. So what channels am I going to use and how am I going to orchestrate those, as well as details like budget and your resource team and any dependencies that you might have in order to execute this campaign. You'll also align on KPIs. And I love the journey criteria because people don't think about this. How are people going to enter this campaign? How are they going to exit this campaign? And what would be their next step once they have gone through this campaign? And then the next section is all about offers and content. So what kind of content am I going to use? And what should my CTA be? What am I asking people to do? What's the offer? And then on the next slide is all about who are we trying to target with this campaign? So what personas, primary and maybe there's secondary. These are very specific pain points and current states in the next section that you want to make sure are clearly available to the team that's working on it, as well as the value prop you plan to lean into. You'll also think about how you're going to segment that audience. So what titles specifically, what regions, maybe company size, as well as once you do that, your marketing ops team gets involved here because they're going to go pull the list. So how many meet that criteria? Is it too many? Is it the right size? How many customers do we have? If it's customer focused. So this is really, I think, a good summary on how all of those campaign details get materialized together for a team to work collaboratively towards their end goal. And then just a couple of artifacts that I felt like it was important for you to see that come out of that you may want to consider including. And one of those is a content map similar to this. So whoever is assigned to this campaign and is doing the assessment from a content perspective, typically a content individual, is looking at the library of content and saying, okay, based on what we're trying to achieve here and who it's going to, what content do I need to have? And make sure that it covers the entire funnel so you can see all the way from top to bottom. And then where do I have gaps? What do I need to communicate that I don't have anything that aligns to? And those places are shaded here. So this is just a really simple way to look at your content and then have a library of content that's available to the people who are actually building the materials in the campaign itself. And then the next slide is an example of a tactical calendar. And I love this kind of visual view of your campaign because it does see all of the channels, the quarter that it's actually going to span, as well as it's a little visually appealing and cumbersome. So it's something that you can actually share with your stakeholders that are outside of marketing so that they see the components and they can be aligned with what marketing is doing to support an effort over the course of the year. So I've talked a lot. I'm going to pass it back over to Kathy because all of these things require a basic foundation in order for them to work in that collaborative motion. So Kathy, I'll let you pick it up from there.
Kathy, I think you're on mute.
You are absolutely right. So thank you. Shelley, thank you. Shelley talked about sort of the what and the why. I want to talk about the how, the engine. How do you make this all come together? Like you can see, she's the destination. It's all, how do you get all the teams to work together to actually deliver, have campaigns that deliver results? So this is your campaign planning survival guide. And so the first one, there's 4 things I go over: RACI, a workflow, and a planning and meeting cadence. So let me paint a picture for you. If you can sit your entire marketing team around a pizza, you probably don't need this. You've got one meeting, everyone goes, I know what to do, done, campaigns are done. But once you add in multiple teams, specialists, agencies, you will probably experience what we call collaboration drag. And you will know if you have collaboration drag, if it takes you longer to schedule the meeting than it does to actually do the campaign work. And it's one of these things that just happens and it's frustrating, and people go into it and they mean well. Like what happens is you have so many meetings, you have so much coordination, you have so many communications that people just retreat to their comfort zone. And the webinar team says, just some of the topics. I want to do 6 webinars this month. And the event team goes in auto planning mode. And everyone means well going in. They agree to that big high level plan, but then they just become overwhelmed and frustrated by everything that's involved. And so you need ways to make sure that doesn't happen. And the best way is there's 3 things. You need a RACI, because saying someone should do that is not a strategy. You need to basically lock into workflows so people know really the gates and they have clear SLAs. And you need a meeting cadence, because the last thing you want is 15 people in a meeting discussing the copy on a landing page. And that's when you know you have this collaboration drag. So you may be a team, not many people, you just need a high-level RACI. Here's the deliverable, here's who's responsible. Or you may need a lot more detail, where not only the action, but what are the inputs you need, what are the dependencies. You'll need to decide what level of RACI you need for your team. You need a workflow, you need a planning workflow, you need an execution workflow. Execution, if you want to get a campaign out December 1st, what are things that have to happen prior? And basically, people need to know basically get what lane are they in, when do they need to deliver it, and when do they pass the baton? That's what this is all about if you want things to actually happen. And then you need a planning and meeting cadence. Again, if you want to avoid 15 people in a meeting all debating what the copy should be in a landing page, you need to know what are the inputs, what are the outputs, who should attend a meeting, what are the gates to get to the next stage. This is the infrastructure you need to avoid collaboration drag and to actually get all those beautiful plans you created actually delivering results. And the last thing I recommend is getting some type of templates. You can have whatever templates you want. But again, these are not just because they're pretty. It's so your teams will have consistent, usable information from every team. So you don't go through the 20 questions like, this is missing. What did you mean by this? It's the 20 questions guessing game you go through. And so with that, Jim, I'm going to take you through. That's sort of the infrastructure you need to get all the people working together. But I want you to go over now this top-down versus bottom-up, because this is where I also see a disconnect. We have lofty plans, but then you don't have the people, budget, or resources to deliver.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. You know, the whole planning process can be a bit janky at times, right? Especially if you're not sitting around the table that comes up with the corporate objectives and kind of sets the annual plan and annual strategy, right? For the average marketer who's sitting in some team somewhere responsible for a region or a product, they might be wondering like, can I begin planning if I don't know what the budget is? And the answer is yes, 100%. You should begin that planning process, right? There's this interlock that occurs where it kind of starts with your corporate objectives. It then comes to what your big OKRs are going to be. And then marketing starts to come up with a plan on the page at the leadership level. And during that process, this occurs. Now, this is an eyeful here to look at. And I covered this on the first workshop we did. But if you just follow the orange here, it basically is like following the dollars, right? This comes from serious decisions, right? And their goal, their recommendation is don't fall into the trap of allocating your budget from a strategic point of view to functions and marketing. Don't say you're going to spend 15% on content and 50% on demand and this how much on customer, because what will happen then is the notion of a campaign or the theme will quickly fall by the wayside, and people will go about spending their money and doing the things that they've been trained to do. Like, I'm going to go create a bunch of content and look later for a campaign and a persona to target it at. So instead, this kind of top-down says, get to a view of your 4, 5, 6 campaigns where you have allocated large buckets of dollars to be specific to the campaigns to keep the team aligned. So if you can move on from this, the next slide says, okay, great. So I have my campaigns, campaign A, B, C, D. I've allocated these dollars, and those campaigns need to support, as you saw in the campaign kind of plan on the page, what persona are we going after, what segment, what geography, what industry, what products we serving, the use cases, etc. Good, I have that. The team needs to start thinking about, okay, what are we going to actually do to come up with these campaign plans, right? We have spend, but what is the intent of the spend? What things are we going to do? What activities? And then it becomes this process of the team starts working at their best guesses for how they can hit the objective, and they're making estimates of the resources required to execute those campaigns. And that's where you get to this interlock process. If you move to the next slide, it kind of looks like this. This is where reality happens, right? Some dollars have been allocated and set aside at the top, but the team comes back and says, well, in this campaign, we're going to run several different programs, and each of those are going to have tactics, and there'll be activations, and there'll be activities. And if I start to work across the team and add up the costs to execute that campaign, lo and behold, we need more resources than what's been allocated from the top down. And this is where it comes to that winnowing process we talk about, right? How do you make decisions about what to fund and what not to fund to hit the campaign objectives? Okay, so this is the process. These campaign estimates happen. It's a natural part. And then we get to the interlock to get top down to match the bottom up process. And that can happen in a number of ways, but the first way, the most important way to tackle that is by going through what we call impact modeling. Now, on your campaign framework, you literally had a budget placeholder, and then you had KPIs that you should be hitting, depending on the program type. If you just jump ahead to the next slide, we've all, as marketers, taken many swings at how to do this. They all boil down to a spreadsheet that makes a bunch of assumptions. Okay? You have a whole bunch of levers, and you got to make assumptions on those levers. Okay, like how many am I going to get into the top of the funnel? How many people I'm going to engage with? What is the conversion rate that's going to opportunities in pipeline into sales? How long does it take for that conversion rate to happen, etc.? This should all be informed by last year's plan, which is why marketing operations and/or your data analytics team are a critical part of the planning process. They don't sit aside and wait for the rest of marketing to come up with a plan, and then they're just going to engineer it and activate it in your MarTech systems, etc. They actually have to be part of the planning process, because if you don't have this data at your fingertips, it becomes really difficult to survive that winnowing process, your campaign, to survive the cut, if you will, to make the cut. Now, this is an example of a template that the folks of Inverter put together, where you can model performance of campaigns either annually or quarterly or by objective, etc. And we all have different approaches. Again, there's a huge advantage to having this built into the software that holds your plans, right? So that data, that performance data, feeds the planning process and informs it even when you move to execution. But we call this impact modeling. Like, what will the impact of this plan be? And if you move ahead, the next slide basically says, all right, now it's decision time, right? Survival of the fittest, survival of the best. If you then take all of the tactics and plot them on a simple 2x2 grid, which says what is the potential impact of this tactic and how much resources are required in dollars, people, time, whatever it might be, you now can get to a stage in the planning process where the best ideas boil up to the top, right, to get funding. And that's how you can kind of get from this bottoms up estimate to the top-down allocation. Now, this is greatly simplified. I totally recognize that. And there's a couple of gotchas or things to look out for, right? And the first is you have to maintain a plan balance. Okay, demand is fed by brand, and advocacy feeds demand, which requires customer engagement, right? So in the serious decisions frameworks or Forrester, they have 4 different program types, and you can't necessarily just put all your eggs into one of those baskets, right? There's brand, demand, engagement, and enablement types of programs. And so you got to maintain that plan balance because they each feed each other. The second one is comparing apples to oranges or trick to treats. I'm sorry, it's Halloween. I had to say something. Someone dared me.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Apples to oranges, right? So if you're going to weigh everything on pipeline and sales, then it's pretty obvious that your demand programs are going to rise to the top and you're never going to do anything with customer engagement, right? And that's kind of a false narrative. So you want to compare program types against one another and not necessarily across them. It's the only way really to try and weigh the best of the best. And finally, there's the risk reward. Jess pointed this out in an earlier conversation, like this is pretty subjective. And yeah, it is, because guess what? Marketing is subjective. Our job is to not only do what has been done, but to identify opportunities which involve risks, which are not informed by prior data. It's the same as when you look at your retirement fund or your investment fund. You're not putting everything in bonds right now. I'm pretty sure of it. You got a lot in the Magnificent Seven, and maybe you got a couple in Bitcoin or whatever it might be, right? High returns, higher risk, balance against steady returns with lower risk. Okay, but this is the process that marketing teams go through. And as you can imagine, it's an involved process because we're not talking about 4 tactics. We might be talking about 4,000 tactics. Okay, but that's how you get to that interlock where your budget from the bottom up meets your top-down strategic allocation.
And Jim, I think you bring up a good point. To me, this is where the CMO really plays a big role. How do you prioritize? Where do you make those bets? And then communicate it, because you own the organization, the resources, and the budget. And it's a tough job.
Yeah.
I don't envy you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Only in that part, you know. I mean, you suffer that you either bask in the glory or suffer the consequences, but you are just making some educated guesses. And this is where having a system like Uptempo can really help you make, I think, better educated guesses. So it's really nice. But as I mentioned, there are things that can go wrong. And one of the first ones we always see is, I just see it so often. I talked about at the beginning, the annual plan just goes on a virtual, it's like people see it as a one-time thing. Got that done, it goes on a virtual shelf. And it's not used throughout the year to drive your strategy. It's not used to mean say how you're contributing to that plan. You know, marketers lose interest to it and they just become reactive. If they just go back to, oh, I need to get this, I need to do that, sales it has to be this. And I think coming back to that plan is where you're going to see success. The RACI, it's really hard to get that enforced. It's a change of behavior, and you just get too many cooks in the kitchen. PMM thinks, oh, I should be writing email copy. Or they're complaining they are writing email copy. I've seen it go both ways. You know, everyone has a place, a role in this whole thing, and the RACI and the workflows really spell out for people where they should have a role, what they should contribute, and when they're not involved, and with the deadlines they have. And getting that in place, that whole infrastructure is critical to make this work. And the last one is town gyms. I see too often where, like I said, the plan goes on a virtual shelf and then everyone just goes back doing their webinars and they're not connected. And you'll never achieve your goals unless those two are tied together. You're never going to have those conversations with executives about what is marketing's impact. So, and I'll wrap up with, you know, unless you were very lucky and had a CMO that took you under their wing, I think I mentioned the last one, you are not taught how to plan. It's something you learn on the job. And with every campaign plan, hopefully you get better and better at it. But the 4 things I'll tell you need to do is, the big thing is getting alignment. If you don't get your team all rowing in the same direction, all working towards the same goals and really getting that focus, it's just going to go off track. The other one people love, we call this the gift of focus. People really want to feel good and contribute to the larger plan. They want to know where they fit in. And giving them the priorities and the guidance about what they need to deliver helps them, instead of them retreating into, I'm just going to do my webinar right now, I'm just going to do my emails. We'll give it to them. Unified execution. If I hear you think you have it all together and then someone says, oh, I have a new white paper, can we do a campaign around it? If that happens, you don't have unified execution. It's, again, too many people in a meeting, not connected to the larger plan you have. And there's no one I know that put a plan together in January that it's 100% accurate later. This actually gives you a framework. You're going to have shifting conditions, changing conditions. This gives you a nice framework to get your team more easily pivoted to what needs to happen based on what's going on in the market. And so with that, Jim or Shelley, any other closing comments?
No, I have nothing to add. I will say that, and this is part of what we call the backstage pass later, but these are awesome templates. They're really good. And there's a lot of questions about the templates and getting access and everything else. Done a great job. At a certain point, when you scale from your 25 marketers to 50 and up through 100, and next thing you know, you had 1,000 marketers, there's a limit to what you can do with templates. You know, it just becomes hard. Like, that calendar is fantastic until someone wants to see the calendar according to their region or their product or a certain persona or the buyer stage or whatever. How do you quickly do that? You end up like, oh, let me rework it. I'll go back to our thing and then send you another picture in a slide of what this looks like. And it becomes really challenging. That's why some types of system, a system of record for planning, becomes important as you scale the business.
And I'm just going to add to that, Jim, and I think I've mentioned this before, almost all our MarTech tools are around execution. You know, they're around how to run webinars, how to send more emails, how to do more social posts. There's nothing until this type of software to me that helps you run the business of marketing, like managing marketing as a discipline. And it's really nice to see. And I think that's what we've been missing. Like, if you look at supply chain managers, they've always had supply chain software, like all other functions do. And marketing has just been at a disadvantage that way. So, but with that, Jess, I will bring it over to Q&A.
Thank you. Did anybody else notice that Jim said he didn't have anything to say and then he did have something to say? Just giving you a hard time, Jim. All right. So, but thank you. Thank you to the 3 of you for sharing all of your insights on campaign planning and budgeting and doing it the right way. I think one of the key takeaways for me here is around that gift of focus, right? And giving everybody on the marketing team a sense that they're a part of something bigger than themselves, right? That they're actually contributing to the goals of the organization, the marketing organization, and the business as a whole. Because sometimes if you're the webinar operations person, right, you get mired in that day to day. Whereas, once you do this type of planning around campaigns versus these random active marketing, now they see where their role is in the success of these overall campaigns. And I think that's a really, really good for morale, motivation, and just overall performance. So thank you all for that. So, all right. So some of you have already submitted some questions, but if you have not yet, please do so at the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. And a quick reminder here before we dive into the Q&A, stick around for the last 10 minutes of today's webinar, and the team at Uptempo is going to give you a backstage pass look into Uptempo. And after we get through some of your pressing questions for today. So, all right, as I mentioned, we already have a few in the hopper here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. But like I said, any additional questions, please add them into that Q&A section. So the first question for our panelists today here is, okay, this is all well and good, but how do I get my team on board with this plan? Who is the ideal person to manage this process? And how do we make a process like this stick? All right.
Kelly, you want to take that one and I'll chime in?
I was actually, I have to admit, looking at the questions coming in and saw the last one. So can you repeat that question really quick?
Sure. How do I get my team on board with this plan? Who is the ideal person to manage this process? And how do we make it stick?
Yeah. So I feel very strongly, because I've actually done this for an organization that I was at before I even came to Inverta. So I've been where most of you are and had to manage these types of teams. And you need someone internally who's actually going to hold people accountable to the process. So it's all great to have RACIs, it's all great to have templates, but unless you've got somebody who's leading in the right place of authority, who is leading that team and holding people accountable down the line, it will fall apart. So you have to make sure that you don't let people fade back into the old way of planning. So that's the first thing I would say. And then I think that the person to lead this, it could be, I think you have to have a good CMO who's supportive of the process. But I do think as it relates to planning itself, typically you'd see a person who leads demand gen, or you'd see somebody who's in charge of campaign planning. That role is the one that you typically see leading the front. So they're doing the briefs, they're bringing that collective team together, but they do have support of upper management.
Anyone else want to chime in? I actually do have one comment. So one thing is, I am a person who tends to be allergic to process. I think everybody here at Inverta knows that about me. But I do have to say, and the RACI might seem like a lot of process, but what it does do is it puts a process in place that will outlast turnover within your organization. So if it's a process that actually works, right? You have new team members come to the fold, great, you go, here's the process, right? I had one organization that I worked with when I was a client partner here at Inverta, and that organization had a new CMO come in, and the RACIs persisted, right? So even though, new CMOs tend to come in with their own processes, the RACI persists and keeps things moving on. You have a new head of solutions marketing. I think Kathy made, this comment earlier. New head of solutions marketing comes in, and they have their perception of what their team's role is. And then you look at the RACI and go, well, actually, here's how we've organized it here at our organization. So I think that RACI, while a little bit of an eye roll moment, I think is actually a really important tool to keep this on track.
I'll add one other thing, and we can move on. Is just we've seen in our customers the role people that are pushing the planning process and keeping on the same page, it really bounces around between different functions. You're right, yes. I think sometimes you have a really good planning person that's head of your demand, and they kind of run this process because they own a lion's share of the budget, but not always. Often we see the role of a chief of staff step in and
I've seen
actually run
chief
the
of
planning
staff come
process.
up a lot.
Very, very
Yeah.
popular. It's almost like a neutral person that represents the
Yeah.
office, CMO, coordinating that. Really depends on the size and of course the people you have.
Right.
Well, and
And
that's,
ops, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Jess.
no, go ahead, Kathy.
So I've also seen ops will lead it when, because it affects them from a budget standpoint and trying to pull it together. But you really need that upper level to really have people change what they're doing. Like you need someone there that can really enforce the rules to start. A lot of times we are brought in just because it's hard to tell others what to do. If you have a head of campaigns and a head of product, they both like to be heads of the organization, and sometimes it's easy to have someone come in and say, here are some best practices, here's how we've seen it work. And so it's not you telling PMM how to do their job, but PMM telling you how to run campaigns. And it's a dance. It's a dance to get those RACIs working. And they're slightly different for every org. Like it's all how you set up and so many things involved with them. But it's a good question from whoever sent it in.
Well, and some of this leads into the next question here, which is how does this type of a process change for small, medium businesses to large enterprises? It's funny, you were talking about a chief of staff. Most small to medium businesses aren't going to have a chief of staff role, right? That's going to be at the bigger organization. But how, and this could be a whole webinar in and of itself. How is this process different, smaller to larger organizations? But can you give just kind of a brief overview on some of the subtleties and how this shifts?
I can take that to start. Oh, go ahead, Shelley. Do you want?
Nope. You do it, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, okay, for a small business, like I said, if you can fit everyone on a pizza, you don't probably need it. But like the first race I showed, it's just, hey, who's going to do content? Who's going to do this? Like that could be enough. But as you add more teams, the largest I've done is there were 28 teams because they had regional, they had global, they had regional ops centers, they had agencies that did creative, they had agencies that did translations. And suddenly the RACI was one of the longest ones I've done. But unless you get that clear, and then you said get clear about global campaigns. Are they all global? What percent should be campaigns? What should the field be able to do? So I think it's just a tiered approach. And like I said, you'll know you need it when you hit that collaboration drag or when you just find everyone's doing their own thing. Like I said, if it takes longer to schedule the meeting than it does to do the actual work, you need a better process.
And I would add on that doesn't actually, though, preclude you from doing the appropriate planning. You still need to plan campaigns. You still need to know what you're going to do on an annual basis. You still need to know what are my campaigns driving. So all of those I don't think go away, but some of the more, weighty foundations pieces can be simplified. If I've only got a 5-person team, I can still leverage my program template and I can still plan on a quarterly basis aligned against themes. It's just that I don't have to collaborate with 15 people. I have to collaborate with 4 additional people and myself. So it materializes differently.
Okay. All right, we're getting a lot of questions here. I don't know that we're going to get to them all, so I apologize, but we will capture them. And maybe what I can do is put some of the answers in the follow-up email that we will be sending out tomorrow. But a really quick question, I think, Shelley, you can answer this quick, is around the tactic calendar. So the question is, do the lines represent all phases to go live? How do you communicate the go live date when external teams outside of marketing can expect something to be launched? Just a real quick overview on that.
Yeah. So the tactic calendar I showed was what that campaign looks like from launch and how long it's going to be in market. So it was a visualization of here are all the channels that we're going to use and how long they're going to be in market and generally when they're going to be introduced. like mid-May or whatever. So it was more to high level align your team, but also to be used as a tool that you can align stakeholders. I would definitely say for a like working project plan is how you would actually keep track of all your phases and go lives in your pre-launch and launch phases.
Yep. Okay, perfect.
I'll only add to that, like, this is why I encourage people, especially in large enterprises, to stick around for the backstage pass, because the tactic calendar you create cannot do the job for all the audiences and stakeholders. Some
That's
people
right.
want to see by their territory, some people want to see by product, some people want to see by
Yes.
page, etc. And guess what? You just can't filter a spreadsheet in enough ways to solve all of the needs, and that spreadsheet's out of date immediately. So
Yeah.
Yep.
right, it's we talk about system of record, and that boils down to the most essential thing is a real-time updated calendar that can be filtered.
All right, a few more questions here, and then we do have to go to the backstage pass. But one that just follows up on that is, how do you visualize the campaign calendar following the buyer's journey? And I think my quick answer to that would be, the tactics and channels aren't necessarily going to change, but your content is. So Shelley had shown the content calendar that maps to that. I would say that those two have to be kind of companion pieces so that people can understand, okay, these channels are going to be live, right? And then here's the different messages / content that we're going to be sharing based on where somebody is in the buyer's journey. Would you,
100%.
okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to rush anybody, but I do want to get to as many questions as we can. So I love this one. What's the best practice you have for marketing managers to think about setting metrics so it's a part of the effort and not an afterthought? Love that question.
I'm just going to weigh in to start is if you notice on the annual plan, it had specific goals. And then when you look at your annual campaign, that had goals. Those metrics should just be tied right to that. That's how you're showing what your impact is. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Uptempo team. So please stick around for the next 8 minutes and get a quick backstage pass at to how like Uptempo can really actually help with this process. As Jim mentioned, you can slice and dice things really easily in a tool like Uptempo to give all of your stakeholders the view that they need into your marketing plan. So with that, Drew, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Happy to be here today. So let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can see everything that we've talked about today in context of a system of record. And so where we're going to start is, of course, this idea of we have these different plans. We're doing strategic planning. We're doing our campaign planning. We need a place to articulate that all the way down to that granular level of tactics and different activations. And so Uptempo supports that complexity. We can have multiple different types of plans. These can have different structures. So larger businesses where you have global organizations and different business units, different regions and countries that you're marketing to, all of that can be represented within your plan. Where smaller organizations, you might just need to go straight in from any given plan and have your campaigns, programs, tactics, and so on. And so within Uptempo, we can visualize all of that. And so if I give you a quick example here, I've got my B2B marketing plan. I then underneath this have several different campaigns. For any of these campaigns or any of these activities that I'm entering into the system, I'm going to have very specific attributes for them. So I'm not having to look at everything under the sun in one spreadsheet where I've got some columns filled out and others are not. Instead, I have the relevant information at the relevant place in my plan. And so for this campaign, I've got my objective and my theme. Here's my messaging. So now everything that I'm creating underneath this is going to be guided by that messaging. As we drill down deeper, I then start to detail out my programs. What am I offering? What's the program family? In this case, this example is for awareness. It might also be for demand gen or customer advocacy. I can have those details here and making sure that I'm collecting the information at the right place. This is also where I might detail out what kind of strategic alignment I have. So all of that planning that we're doing prior to our campaign process of what are we aiming for? What are those OKRs and goals for the business? I'm making sure that these campaigns and programs and initiatives are associated with that. And this gives me the ability of reporting on and understanding where I'm investing my dollars and whether or not that's aligned with the business. As we go down deeper, now I'm getting to the point where I'm doing my tactics. I might have digital banner ads. Those digital banner ads, I might have different planning scenarios. Maybe it's purely discretionary. Maybe it's something that's essential to our plan because it's a new product launch. I'm going to have details on the target persona or the customer segmentation, even the customer journey stages that I might be focusing on. And then ultimately, what's my offering? Is it a product or service? Is there a channel? And all of those details. By building out all this in one system, you now have it in one place. And these, of course, can be walled gardens. So if you want to make sure to declutter the noise, these teams can be siloed. So you don't have to worry about someone in a particular region or country being burdened with seeing details about another country that they never have to be involved with. But more importantly, it gives you a framework or a central overarching umbrella to connect a variety of different details. These includes things like the budget. What are those estimated costs? What are those planned costs that I have? Being able to not only see it from a top-down perspective on a yearly or quarterly basis, but also getting details on the roll-up, how much I might be estimating for those different channel activations for those digital banner ads. This can also then be connected to our spend side of the platform, where I might have a different budget like digital media, and I have a specific line item for the Q1 banner ads where I can see exactly what I have planned spent for that. And once I have that connection in place, any forecasted dollars or any committed dollars or actuals coming in, I have all that detail connected and rolling up into one place. And as I move throughout this hierarchy, I'm getting all of that information very quickly and very easily. So I can see how everything is rolling up, in this case, to the 5.2 million for that entire campaign. And as I continue on and look at other details, I can get all of that as well. What I'll take a quick stab at now is actually our impact modeler. And let me dive down a little bit more to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. So when we want to do impact modeling within the system, as I'm creating these tactics and campaigns and initiatives, all those details that I'm filling out, the target audience, the channel, and the customer segment, this is essentially my brief, but it is also giving us the ability to alter and adjust what kind of model we have in the background. And so as the marketer, I don't have to pay attention to those details. All I'm concerned with is, what am I leading into for the top of the funnel? What kind of engagement, whether it's leads, clicks, you name it. So in this example for the digital banner ads, I'm expecting 1,500 for that engagement. I can have those results distributed based on the period of or the duration for this particular activity. And going from there, I ultimately get this projection. But before we dive in on that, what I want to show is some funnel assumptions, because really this is how we're getting that output of, in this case, an expectation of 1.1 million revenue for what we're investing in these digital banner ads. So those target audiences, those different regions and things, the product and service, that will impact our conversion rates between the different stages of our waterfall, as well as the velocity and even our deal sizes. And from that, that's where we get our projections. So if we look at things from a base planning perspective, I'm creating a new activity, I put in that plan engagement, I can very quickly get a model where I can understand, if we look at the top here, that I expect my engagement to hit its target on March 31st, but my revenue isn't going to come in until May 10th. This is incredibly valuable if you're trying to plan to meet some objective that sales has for a given quarter or the end of the fiscal year. I need to make sure that there's enough lead time from when I expect my target to be reached to when that revenue should be coming in. If I was planning this in December, I wouldn't make my target at all. So I need to make those adjustments. When we integrate with CRMs and other tools, then we can start to bring in actuals and compare how accurate our model was to what we actually saw in the system. And then we can use this year over year to adjust our models and ultimately impact not only our business, but improve our ability to understand what kind of impact we're going to have. And this becomes a crucial tool for a well-organized marketing plan. When we look at these impact models, it's not just all about what level we're at. It's also a great way to understand things from the broader context. So if I go all the way up to the top of my plan here, I can now see every campaign, program, and tactic rolled up into one impact model. And this gives me a great way to just turn around virtually instantly and say, here's what we had planned for, here's where we are today, here's what we're expecting in the future. Not only by having all these details in one system, does it allow us to really make sure that we're orchestrating marketing across the board from all those different initiatives, but it's also a place to really roll things up from this perspective. So if we think about our go-to-market positioning and our plans, we want to be able to roll up all the data in a very clean and friendly way. So in this view, I'm looking at everything across all my different plans, but let's say I want to drill down into this. So maybe specifically, I want to focus on programs with a particular strategic alignment. I might want to focus on engaging our target audience. I can go ahead and filter for that. So now I've narrowed down to those specific campaigns and initiatives, and perhaps maybe I want to see this grouped by something like target persona. So I can stay in these same views, whether it's on that timeline view or in the summary view, and get answers to what have I estimated for that target audience by target persona. We're estimating 5 million investment for it. How much have we do we have left based on those estimations? What is our planned spend associated with this? And what is our impact? So what's that planned revenue for all of these different details? And I can still go into each one of these different pieces, go down to that individual tactic or activity, find out what that impact model looks like, or even individual budgets. And more importantly, as we have these complex plans and as our budgets grow in size and complexity, we need the ability to not only fund these activities in a very intuitive way, but we also need to make sure that we can manage those funds very quickly and very easily. So as I attach different funds from different budgets and different line items, I also need to be able to look at those funds and understand how they might be split across different initiatives. So in this example for this event, I can see that the Formula EPO, this is actually funding 2 different initiatives. I've got that sponsorship for the World Championship as well as a landing page. When I want to understand how I'm allocating this funds across all my different months and quarters, in this case, we can see 150K for January, as well as 50K for February and so on. I can go into my activity funding, and this is where I can understand what I've allocated and when, and whether or not I have unallocated funds that I might need to put in here and make sure that this is accounted for. This in turn gives us the ability to make sure that we have line item allocations from both sides of the platform, whether we have one activity with many different funds investing it, or having a single line item fund multiple activities. At the end of the day, once we have all of these details, we of course want to be able to report on all of this. We want to understand what we're investing in for our different campaigns and initiatives and how those stack up comparatively, and being able to segment that information to understand what our top initiatives are from a funding perspective, as well as being able to look at this from a performance perspective, to be able to stack rank and understand where we're going to be bringing in the biggest impact for the business. And with that, I'll turn it back to the team for any last minute or closing remarks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. Really appreciate that walkthrough. And thank you to Kathy, Shelley, and Jim for sharing all your insights today. We do have our 3rd and final workshop of the series on November 14th, so be sure to join us for that. And feel free to reach out to us at Uptempo or Inverta if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.